No border between the red of the mouth, there is no line where her lips end. Look as closely as you like. Go right up to the paint. There is no edge, no outline, and the shadow of the cheek beside it. One becomes the other so gradually that you cannot find the exact place it happens. And that softness, that impossible smoke-like blur, is the single hardest thing to do in all of painting. Harder than a face, harder than an eye, harder than fire. It's skin. Human skin is the one subject every painter has to attempt, and almost none of them ever conquer, because skin does something no other surface does. It's not a color. It's not even a texture. Light goes into skin, bounces around underneath it, and comes back out somewhere slightly different, carrying the color of the blood and fat it passed through on the way. Skin glows from the inside, and paint, flat, opaque, sitting on a surface, does not. So for 300 years, the best painters in Europe fought a private war over how to fake it. Not a war of styles, a war of engineering, and the weapons they invented are hiding in plain sight in every gallery you've ever walked through. You know this painting. Almost everyone does, and almost nobody has ever asked the only question that actually matters about it. Not who she was, not what she's thinking, but how Vermeer made a piece of cloth stretched over wood look like it has a pulse. The answer took 3 centuries to arrive at. And it's a story with a body count of reputations, because getting skin wrong is the fastest way to ruin a painting. A slightly wrong sky, nobody notices. A slightly wrong hand, you get away with it, but skin that's a shade too pink, a touch too grey, a fraction too flat, and the whole figure dies. It stops being a person and becomes a painted doll. Everyone can see it. This is the war to stop that from happening. It has 4 fronts, 4 solutions, and it runs from a cold room in Bruges in the 1430s to a studio in London worth $33 million. Start with why this is so hard, because the difficulty is the whole story. Take a red apple and a human arm and put them in the same light. The apple is simple. Light hits the skin of the apple, bounces straight off, and comes back to your eye as red. The surface is the event. What you see is what's on top. Now, the arm. Light hits it. But skin isn't a wall, it's a stack of translucent layers. Some light bounces off the top, the oily sheen. But most of it sinks in. It passes through the outer layer, into the flesh, hits the web of tiny blood vessels underneath, picks up their warmth, scatters around, and comes back out a few millimeters away from where it went in, softened and reddened, and carrying the light of the inside of a body. Scientists have a name for this now. Subsurface scattering. Film studios spend fortunes computing it. Painters had to fake it by eye, with mud, 400 years before anyone could explain what they were faking. That's why skin has no hard edges. The light is leaking sideways under the surface, and that's why a painter armed only with opaque paint, paint that sits on top, like the skin of the apple, is going to produce something that looks like a corpse. Flat color on flat surface reads as dead meat, which, if you think about it, is exactly what it is. The painters knew this. They couldn't have told you about blood vessels and scattered photons, but they had eyes, and they could see that mixing a pink on a palette and putting it flat on a panel gave you a mannequin. So the war begins with a single, brilliant, counterintuitive discovery, and it's the discovery that everything else in this video is built on. If you want skin to glow, you don't start with pink. You start with green, and I want you to sit with how strange that is, because it's the thing that separates a painter who understands skin from one who doesn't. Every instinct you have says that to paint a pink cheek, you reach for pink paint. Every serious figure painter for 500 years has told you the opposite. Reach for green first. The people who got skin wrong are almost always the people who trusted the obvious answer. The war is a long argument about how to be counterintuitive in exactly the right way, and it starts in the one place you'd least expect to find the secret, in the parts of paintings the artist never finished. This is a Michelangelo, and it's broken. He abandoned it. Look at the 2 figures on the left. They're green, not shadowed green, not sickly green, solid, deliberate, pea soup green, because Michelangelo died before he could. Stopped before he could. Paint the skin on top. What you are looking at is the secret. This is the underpainting, and it has a name, verdaccio. A cold greenish-grey layer mixed from black, white, and yellow ochre that painters laid down first and built the entire figure in. All the light and shadow, the whole three-dimensional form, worked out in green before a single warm tone went anywhere near it. Why green? Because green is the opposite of red on the color wheel, and skin is fundamentally a red event. When you later glaze thin, translucent, warm pinks and ochres over a cool green base, two things happen at once. The green kills the excess pink, so the skin never goes candy-colored and false. And this is the miracle. The light travels through the transparent warm glaze, hits the pale green underneath and bounces back up to your eye. The glow doesn't sit on the surface. It comes from underneath. The painter has physically rebuilt subsurface, scattering out of layered mud. They didn't understand the physics. They arrived at the exact right answer anyway, by trial and error, over a century. Green earth from a mine near Verona, under the skin of half the saints in Italy. Leonardo used it under the Mona Lisa. And when a figure was meant to be dead, a crucified Christ, they often just left the green showing, because they knew correctly that flesh with no warmth under it looks like a body with no blood in it. Think about what that means as a piece of knowledge. Somewhere in the 13th or 14th century, painters noticed, with no theory of optics, no idea what light even was, that cool green under warm pink produces the illusion of a living body, and warm pink alone produces a doll. That's not a style. That's an experimental result, discovered by a trade, passed down through workshops for 300 years as a craft secret, from master to apprentice, in cities that were often at war with each other. The recipe for verdaccio appears in a painter's handbook written around 1400 by a man named Cennino Cennini, who learned it from his master, who learned it from Giotto. A chain of hands, each one grinding black and ochre and white into a green. Nobody in the street would ever guess was the foundation of human skin. And the reason we can prove all this, the reason it's not just a theory, is paintings like this one, the ones the masters walked away from. A finished masterpiece hides its secret under the final layer. An abandoned one leaves the machinery exposed. Every unfinished figure from the period, all across Europe, shows the same thing underneath. The cool ghost, waiting for a warmth that never came. Gon van Eyck, up in Bruges, is running the northern version of the same idea in the 1430s. And he takes it further than anyone. Van Eyck's method is a stack. Chalk ground, a toned primer, then thin oil layers, relatively opaque at the bottom, and getting more and more crystalline and transparent toward the top, so that the pale ground underneath keeps shining up through everything he puts on it. His skin isn't painted. It's assembled like stained glass. Each translucent layer lets light down to the one below and back up again, and the face you see is the sum of all that bouncing. At the very end, on the highest points, the bridge of the nose, the top of the cheekbone, he hits it with a tiny stroke of pure lead, white, full strength, opaque, applied what the old manuals call a corpo, with body. That single opaque highlight sitting on top of all those transparent layers is what snaps the whole face into 3 dimensions. And this is worth slowing down on, because it's the northern half of the war, and it explains why oil paint took over the world. Before Van Eyck, most painters worked in tempera, pigment bound in egg, which dries in minutes and stays stubbornly opaque. You cannot build glowing, translucent, layered skin in a medium that dries before you can blend it and blocks the light when it does. Oil changed everything. Oil dries slowly, so you can work wet into wet, soften, blend, take your time, and oil goes transparent. Pigment ground into linseed oil lets light pass through it in a way egg never could. Van Eyck didn't invent oil paint, whatever the old legend says, but he perfected the layered translucent method that oil made possible, and the first thing that method conquered was human skin. The reason every painter after 1450 is working in oil is, at bottom, that oil could do flesh and tempera couldn't. This is the first front of the war, and it's already won in 1434, sort of. Van Eyck's skin genuinely glows, but it's cold. It's precise, jewel-like, a little bit frozen. Skin observed by a genius with a microscope. It'll take an Italian, 100 years later, to make skin that looks warm enough to touch. And to do it, he'll throw away Van Eyck's precision entirely. But before we get to warmth, there's a middle step, and it's the most famous face on earth. The reason you can't decide whether the Mona Lisa is smiling is a skin technique. Leonardo called it sfumato, from the Italian for smoke. And it's the green ghost method taken to an obsessive extreme. Leonardo built the flesh in that same cool, translucent, layered way. But then he blurred every transition with unimaginable patience, glaze upon glaze. Some of them so thin that modern analysis has found layers just a couple of micrometers thick, a fraction of the width of a human hair, brushed on and blended until no edge exists anywhere in the face. And the corner of her mouth, the exact place a smile lives, is buried in the softest of those shadows. Your eye can't lock onto it, because Leonardo made sure there's nothing hard to lock onto. Look straight at her mouth and the smile fades. Look at her eyes and it returns from the corner of your vision, because peripheral vision handles soft gradients differently from direct vision. The most famous mystery in art is a side effect of a man solving the skin problem too well. He didn't paint an ambiguous smile. He painted skin so soft that the smile had nowhere solid to sit. So now, the painters have the glow of Van Eyck and the softness of Leonardo. What's still missing is heat. Real, living, blood-warm heat. And that arrives in Venice, from a man who painted so loosely his contemporaries thought he'd lost his touch. Venice, 1534. Titian does something that would have horrified Van Eyck. He gives up on precision and gets closer to real skin than anyone in history so far. Titian doesn't build a perfect diagram in green and glaze it neatly. He works the paint. He drags warm, semi-opaque flesh tones across the surface, in broken, uneven strokes, lets the underlayer show through in places, scumbles pale, cool tones over warm ones and warm glazes over cool ones, layer after layer, sometimes dozens of them, until the surface stops looking like paint and starts looking like something that's alive and slightly damp. A contemporary who watched him work said Titian painted the final stages of flesh more with his fingers than with the brush, pressing, smearing, bruising the color into the weave of the canvas. And the reason it works is the same physics as the green ghost, just handled like a musician instead of an engineer. All those broken translucent layers, cool over warm over cool, are doing the subsurface scattering trick. Light diving in, bouncing between the strata, coming back up mixed. But because Titian's touch is loose and irregular, the result isn't a jewel, it's a body. You can feel the softness, the give, the warmth. The Venetians had discovered that the enemy of living skin is neatness. Real flesh is never one clean color, and a painter who lays it down too cleanly kills it. There's a story about Titian in old age, told by a painter who trained under him, that gets at this. They said he would lay in a figure with a few brutal, loaded strokes, a smear of red, a slash of white, a dark for the shadow. Turn the canvas to the wall for months, and only then come back and begin the real work, dozens of glazes, and at the end, the fingers. Rubbing a highlight into the flesh directly with his thumb. Scumbling a half-tone until it dissolved. The final flesh, the story goes, was built more with the hand than the brush, because only a hand can feel its way to something that soft. Whether every detail is true or not, it describes the method exactly. Skin is not drawn, it's grown, layer over layer, until it stops being a picture of a body and starts being an event that behaves like one. For the next 400 years, this is the sentence every ambitious painter has to solve. Build it cool and precise like Van Eyck, or work it warm and loose like Titian. The whole war is fought between those two poles, and the man who finally fuses them is a fat, brilliant, unbelievably fast Fleming, who painted his own wife stepping out of a bath. This is Rubens's second wife, Helena Formant, painted around 1637, wrapped in a dark fur that he put there for one reason above all others, to make her skin sing. Rubens understood something about flesh that's almost a cheat. Skin doesn't have a color of its own, it takes its color from what's next to it. Put pale flesh against dark velvety fur, and the flesh suddenly looks luminous, warm, alive, because your eye judges it against the darkness. He's using the same borrow the contrast trick a candlelight painter uses for fire, except here the flame is a woman's shoulder. But it's what's under that shoulder that matters. Rubens fused the two traditions. He built solid, luminous underpaintings like the northern masters he grew up with. And then he glazed and worked the warm upper layers with all the loose, living touch of Titian, whom he worshipped and copied for years. He famously said that flesh should be painted with a warm shadow and a cool light, the exact opposite of what a beginner does. Because that's how real skin behaves. The light areas catch the cool of the sky, the shadowed areas glow warm with the blood underneath. Cool light, warm shadow. 4 words that took 200 years to earn, and they're still taught in ateliers today. By 1637, the war looks almost won. Van Eyck's glow, Leonardo's softness, Titian's warmth, Rubens's fusion. You could be forgiven for thinking skin was a solved problem. It wasn't, because there were 2 kinds of skin nobody had truly painted yet, and they were the 2 truest kinds of all. The skin of the dead and the skin of the old. Caravaggio paints the death of the Virgin Mary, and the church that commissioned it refused to hang it. Not because it was badly painted, because it was too well painted. He gave the Mother of God the skin of an actual corpse, swollen, greyish, the warmth draining out of it, the arm heavy and slack. There's even a rumour, impossible to prove, that he used a drowned woman pulled from the river as his model. True or not, everyone who saw it understood the accusation in it. This is what a body really looks like when the light goes out of it, and technically, that's the green ghost, with the warmth deliberately withheld. Remember, painters left the bare green showing when they wanted a figure to read as dead. Caravaggio does the grown-up version. He lets the cool, drained, under-warmth starved tones dominate, so the flesh reads as meat that has stopped glowing from within. He proved the whole theory in reverse. If warm glazes over a cool base make skin look alive, then take the warmth away and you get death. Exactly. The technique wasn't just how to paint a living body. It was a dial, and Caravaggio turned it all the way down. Rembrandt paints himself as an old man near the end, and does something no Italian glaze could ever do. He makes skin out of rubble. Go up close to a late Rembrandt face, and the illusion collapses completely. There's no smooth surface, no invisible blending. It's a mess. Thick ridges of lead white troweled on with a knife and the wrong end of the brush, dragged, scraped, piled up into actual physical mountains of paint that throw their own tiny real shadows under the gallery lights. On the forehead, the paint is centimeters proud of the canvas. It looks, from a foot away, like nothing. Like a builder dropped a load of plaster. Step back, and it becomes the most honest skin ever painted. An old man's forehead, creased and shining and loose over the skull. Because Rembrandt worked out the final secret, at a certain age, skin stops being translucent and starts being terrain. The young glow of Titian's Venus is gone. What's left is texture, slackness, the light catching 1,000 tiny ridges. So he stopped glazing and started sculpting. He made the paint itself as thick and broken and rough as old flesh, so that the real light in the real room does to his painted skin exactly what it does to a real face. He's not depicting the texture. He's rebuilding it in 3 dimensions, out of lead. Van Eyck faked the light inside skin. Rembrandt faked the surface of it by making the surface real. 2 completely opposite solutions to the same enemy, and between them, they gave later painters both halves of the answer, the glow underneath and the terrain on top. And notice what age did to the method. Young skin needs the glow, the translucency, the bloodlight coming up from below. Titian's warm Venus. Old skin needs the opposite. It's gone slack and dry and creased. It catches light on its surface instead of letting it in. So Rembrandt physically changed his technique to match the age of the face. Thick where flesh is thick, broken where flesh is loose, the paint itself getting older and rougher as the man got older and rougher. He painted himself something like 40 times across his life, and if you line them up, you can watch the handling coarsen in step with the face. The glazed smoothness of the young man curdling, decade by decade, into the magnificent wreckage of the old one. The technique isn't separate from the subject. The technique is the subject. The paint is aging in real time, which brings us back to her. Vermeer, at almost exactly the same moment Rembrandt is troweling his own face into being, takes a third path, and it might be the most sophisticated of all. Vermeer is a fusion painter. Look at the shadowed side of her face and put it next to Michelangelo's green ghost. You can see the cool, slightly greenish base still doing its work under the warm light. The 400-year-old trick, alive in 1665. But Vermeer adds something nobody had done so deliberately. He softens every single edge. He's thought to have studied optics, possibly used a camera obscura, and he paints the way a slightly out-of-focus lens sees. No hard lines anywhere, tiny highlights blooming into soft discs, one tone melting into the next. exactly the way light actually behaves when it leaks sideways under skin. That's why there's no line where her lips end. Vermeer painted the leak. He painted the thing skin actually does. The sideways scatter, the soft return, not as a diagram but as a feeling, so that 400 years of technical war disappears into a face that simply looks alive. The engineering is invisible. That's the whole point. When the war is won, you can't see the weapons anymore. And then, at the very end of the war, a man in London picks up every weapon at once and aims them at a subject nobody wanted to see. Lucian Freud painted flesh like it was the only thing that had ever interested him. And it more or less was. Skin is not inanimate, he said. It's a living material. He treated a human body as landscape, as terrain, painting every fold and vein and blotch and slackness that 4 centuries of idealizing painters had quietly smoothed away. He used a heavy, dense, lead-based white, the descendant of the exact same lead white Van Eyck was using, loaded on in thick impasto so that, like Rembrandt, the real light in the room rakes across real ridges of paint. Warm shadows, cool lights, the Rubens rule, applied to a sleeping woman on a battered couch. This painting sold in 2008 for $33.6 million. At the time, the most anyone had ever paid for a work by a living artist. For flesh, for the honest painting of ordinary human skin, unflattered, unidealized, every mark left in. 400 years after Michelangelo laid down his first green shadow, the thing that turned out to be worth more than anything was somebody finally telling the complete truth about what a body looks like. And Freud is the proof that the war was never really about beauty. Every weapon in this video, the green underlayer, the cool light and warm shadow, the loaded lead-white highlight, the impasto terrain, was invented to solve one problem: make dead paint behave like living flesh. Freud aimed all of it at a subject the earlier masters would have flattered or refused, and precisely because he refused to flatter, the flesh is more alive than any goddess. You believe it. You can almost feel the warmth of the couch under her. That belief is 400 years old, and it's doing exactly what it was built to do, on a subject it was never built for. So who won the 300-year war? Everyone and no one, because the enemy never changed. From Van Eyck to Freud, every single one of them was fighting the same fact, that paint is opaque and dead, and skin is translucent and alive. And no pigment on earth glows the way a body does. Not one of them beat it. They out-thought it. Van Eyck stacked transparent layers so light could dive in and come back. Michelangelo and the Italians laid green under pink, so the flesh would never go false. Leonardo blurred it into smoke until no edge remained. Titian threw away neatness and worked the warmth in with his fingers. Rubens fused the north and the south and gave us cool light and warm shadow. Caravaggio turned the warmth off and painted the dead. Rembrandt gave up smoothness entirely and built old skin out of rubble. Vermeer hid all of it inside a blur so soft you can't find the seams. Freud took every one of those weapons and pointed them at the truth. 8 solutions. 1 impossible problem. 400 years, and not one of them ever actually beat it. Because you can't. Paint is still opaque today. Skin still glows from the inside today. The gap between them is exactly as wide as it was in 1434. Everything in this video is a workaround, and every painter knew it was a workaround. And that's what makes it heroic instead of sad. They weren't fooling themselves. They were fooling you on purpose, with increasing brilliance for 4 centuries. And here's what you can do now, and it will follow you into every museum for the rest of your life. The next time you're standing in front of a painted person and they seem alive, really alive, like they might breathe, get close. Closer than feels polite. Look at the shadowed side of the face and hunt for the green underneath. Look at the highlights and check whether the light is cool and the shadows are warm. Look at whether the paint is smooth as glass or piled into ridges. Look for the one opaque white stroke on the tip of the nose that's holding the whole face up. Because a painted person who looks alive is not a portrait of a person. It's a portrait of 400 years of other painters. Every trick, every failure, every hard-won discovery about how light behaves inside a human body, all of it stacked up in thin layers under one quiet face. The people who commissioned these paintings thought they were paying for a likeness, a wife, a duke, a saint, a girl in a blue turban. What they actually got was the accumulated result of a war they never knew was being fought. Every glowing cheek in every gallery is a battlefield. Somebody figured out the green. Somebody figured out the glaze. Somebody figured out the warm shadow, the loaded highlight, the soft edge, the honest ridge of old flesh. And they figured it out slowly, painfully, in the dark, without ever being able to explain the physics of the thing they were chasing it purely by eye, generation after generation, until a piece of dead pigment on a dead panel could stop a stranger in a gallery 500 years later and make them feel, for a second, that they were being looked at by someone alive. There's no line where her lips end. Now you know how much history it took to